And we'll start with my first word. Lynbrook affirms, Contention 1 is racism. Surveillance is rooted in racism. Kudnani 11 confirms that 42% of Americans think it is justifiable to profile American Muslims. Racist ideas form the basis for national security surveillance. As a result, the NSA targets Muslim Americans. Chan 15 finds that the algorithms of digital surveillance may be more sensitive to Muslims. There's an Islamophobic bias that furthers racism. This undeniably takes a toll on Muslim Americans. Harvard finds that American Muslims lived in a constant state of paranoia. American Muslim thoughts are controlled by the fear of the NSA. There are two impacts. The first is racism. The NSA justifies their surveillance with racism as Collect 14 finds that the vilification of Muslims are used to justify mass surveillance. The US is exporting anti-Muslim sentiment to other parts of the world. Moreover, government surveillance suppresses Muslim identities. Shahabuddin 15 finds that as a result of government scrutiny, Muslims downplay their religious identity and fear becoming too active in religious activities because they worry that these are indicative to the government of terrorist inclinations. These actions by the government and the fear by Muslim community raise First Amendment concerns. And racism justifies mass murders. Blau 17 finds that racism is evil because its ultimate logic is genocide. Racism, to its conclusion, ended killing about 6 million Jews through genocide. The second is chilling effect. NSA mass surveillance causes citizens to self-censor, as Aziz 20 finds that government surveillance triggers a chilling effect. Citizens self-censor out of fear that their beliefs will invite government scrutiny. Surveillance actively scares off activists. Boykov 7. Surveillance lets dissidents know that they're being monitored to intimidate and scare off activists. Even perception of surveillance is bad, as York 14 finds that the documents leaked by Snowden have had the most impact. Even the perception of being surveilled can have a chilling effect. Since the publication of NSA leaks, 16% of people have avoided speaking out on certain topics. Overall, surveillance crushes social movements. Schneier 18. Surveillance means society cannot experiment with new things without fear. As all social progress began as ideas that were dangerous to assert. Take away privacy and we'll have a harder time breaking down inherited moral assumptions. Crucially, social movements cause legal change. Oakes 2008. Movements embody collective demands to gain support for changes in institutions. Slow social movements changes law to benefit non-elites. Contention 2 is internet freedom. NSA surveillance hurts internet freedom in two ways. First, data localization. Sargson 16 defines that data localization requires the data be physically stored within a country. Countries are pursuing data localization because of Snowden leaks. Hill 14. More than a dozen countries are contemplating data localization laws. Post-Snowden, even democratic countries are considering data localization measures. This is because the NSA accesses US companies' data abroad. Hill 14. The NSA accesses information through American-owned firms located outside the US, leading foreign leaders to conclude that only domestic firms can be trusted to host citizens' data. Moreover, NSA becomes an excuse for countries to pursue localization. Sargson 16. An NSA surveillance scandal revealed the hypocrisy of the US government. As a result, Chinese national discourse revolved around protecting data from foreign countries, serving as an opportunity for China to further data localization. This hurts internet freedom, as Kel 14 finds that the localization of internet impacts human rights by making it easier for countries to engage in censorship and makes pandemics more likely due to lack of data sharing. The second way is credibility. NSA surveillance weakens U.S. international reputation, as Kel 14 finds that government control is an attempt by countries to monitor citizens, which allow the U.S. to maintain moral high ground. Moreover, after the Snowden disclosure, NSA surveillance continues to be the focus of international convenings on internet freedom. There are two impacts. The first is human rights. Internet censorship can lead to political oppression. Fraser 16. The internet is important for transparency of governmental activities. Information control can enable political oppression by threatening individual rights such as freedom of expression. Halvern 14 finds that 3.97 billion people are controlled by authoritarians and bear an enormous social cost. The second impact is pandemics. Government censorship allows pandemics to spread. McKenna 13. Sources are supposed to tip us off about pandemics before they happen, even in the internet age. With more warnings, SARS might have not gained in foothold outside of China. Pandemics are inevitable, as Walsh 17 finds that the number of new diseases per decade has increased, and it's not a question of if, but when the next pandemic happens. All in all, Hastings 16 writes that a pandemic would kill up to 370 million people. Thus,
We negate Contention 1 is pandemics. COVID-19 will lead to more disease surveillance by the NSA. Rosenstein 20 finds COVID-19 could drive surveillance to a much higher level. This will convince policymakers that drastic steps may need to be justified to prevent future pandemics. The length of COVID has made disease surveillance inevitable. As Rosenstein 20 continues, the longer it continues, the more likely that the government will turn to such technologies. The question seems to be not if, but when. This requires the NSA, as Baker et al. 20 contextualizes intelligence sources to identify and prevent the spread of infections, include signals intelligence undertaken by the NSA. It would happen quickly, as the government already wants to do it. As Fusel 20 finds, government officials are anxious to tap the information from phones to help monitor and blunt the pandemic. Enabling this is critical, as there will be another pandemic very soon. Davies 20 finds that we will face a pandemic at least once every 5 years from here on out. Surveillance solves pandemics for two reasons. The first is prevention. Mianska 14 explains collections of signals intelligence allows the government to predict future pandemics. Public health authorities might glean real-time information about disease outbreaks, offering the ability to forecast such events. Scientists have predicted the 05-06 influenza epidemic a week or two ahead of official reports using this method. The second is the speed of response. Gerstel 20 finds that we will need at scale and speed tools we do not have, contact tracing and testing. This will require gathering information about individuals on a massive scale, analyzing the enormous amounts of data with the help of intelligence to achieve actual public health outcomes. A quick response is critical, as LSN 20 finds acting early has the potential to reduce mortality by 95%. The impact is existential. Pamela and Armstrong 15 find that its death toll would be extreme. Modern transport into dense human population allow infections to spread much more rapidly. Extinction risk is possible. In fact, Mandel 20 finds the next pandemics will be at least 100 times worse. Contention 2 is cyber attacks. Attempts to hack are increasing. Miller 19 finds that cyber attacks are increasing and says these attacks have the potential to cause severe damage, increasing in frequency and potency as malicious actors' ability to accurately target critical infrastructure improves. NSA will use internet surveillance to stop cyber attacks. Conkle 19. The NSA gobbled up communications and surveillance data and provided super secret intelligence to monitor real-time internet activity and cyber threats. The mission is to prevent and eradicate threats to weapon systems and the energy sector. Domestic surveillance is critical. As Brandon 15 explains, the NSA is scanning U.S. web traffic for specific malware signatures. Limiting the scans to foreign states is too restrictive. Intel collection is critical for three reasons. The first is malware detection. Goldsmith 13 explains telecom networks are the channels through which malware typically travels. To keep these secure, the government needs powerful intelligence capabilities so it can learn about planned intrusions to raise defenses. The second is hack the hackers. Gallagher 15 explains the NSA's ability to sift through Americans' internet traffic has been expanded as part of efforts to identify malicious hackers. These surveillance has allowed the NSA to monitor U.S. internet networks for information about hacks originating abroad. The third is deterrence. Dart 13 explains that it is unthinkable to leave these systems undefended. The abuse would be unprecedented and catastrophic. If our enemies think we have poor capability, then guess where they're going to hide their malware. In fact, Rosenbago 9 furthers that assessments provide the foundation to craft a strategy to deter adversaries where awareness of the threat is critical. There are two impacts. The first is the grid. NSA surveillance is critical to preventing attacks on power grids. Gorman explains that the federal government is launching an expansive program to detect cyber assaults on the electricity grid. A grid collapse would cause extinction. As Weiss 19 explains that all tech infrastructure and services require electricity. It is through technology that 2% of the population feeds the other 98%. Thus, food production would simply stop entirely and we would starve. The second impact is nuclear. Fritz09 explains that cyber terrorists could insult false orders for launch. Attempts by cyber terrorists to create the illusion of a decapitating strike could be used to launch a mass-scale nuclear attack. Cyber terrorists could cause incorrect information to be transmitted, received, or displayed at nuclear command and control centers. Any nuclear use would be devastating, as Star 15 concludes that it would cause extinction.
Do you want to start, Cross? Yeah, before we start time, could I get the first question since we spoke first?
Of course.
Awesome. Okay, let's talk about your argument about hacking the grid. So isn't like China and Russia already part of our grid? Like, I mean, has already infiltrated our grid, sorry. They've already infiltrated our grid, right?
They've attempted to, but every time they have, we've kicked them out.
Wait, aren't they there's been like recently, like there's been a bunch of hacks on our grid and Russia has already still infiltrated, right?
No, right? So
no? Okay.
No. Basically, what you are right that attempts have been made to compromise the grid, but nothing has been successful because of the NSA. Can I have a question?
Wait. So if we prove that Russia's still in the grid right now, does that mean that the NSA isn't working?
No, because if they aren't unable to do anything on the grid, then the NSA is still solving. Can I have a question?
Okay, sure.
Okay. Go to on your contention 2 on data localization. You mentioned China as an empiric for this. So are you saying that if you affirm China is going to suddenly be like all free with their
No. So China's just an example, but
what are other examples?
So I'm not specifically sure about the specific countries, but the Hill evidence says that there's 14 countries that are previously like democratic and more democratic that are turning towards data localization.
But have any of them actually done it?
I mean, they're contemplating it, and that's our argument. Like,
Hill
if they've already done it, then
says
no
that
evidence.
6 years ago they were contemplating it, but if they haven't done anything yet, then why is the negative?
I mean, I would say that these type of things take a long time to materialize, and at the same time, like, I'm pretty sure the thing above that, the the second Hill evidence, because we cited it a lot, basically says that in the past it's happened as well.
But
we can read it more in depth afterwards. Yeah, it's happened.
Countries like China, obviously, they're not going to change when you affirm, but I'm talking about the ones that might change, like the semi-democratic ones. But have any of those countries done it?
Yeah, that's like what the second piece of Hill evidence goes on to talk about. You can look for it. You can look for it afterwards if you want. But yeah. Could I get a question?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, your first contention on pandemics.
Yep.
So you tell me that pandemics are key to like surveillance is key to stopping pandemics in the United States. But has any pandemic actually started in the United States?
So if I'm not mistaken, the bird flu did. And also, I have evidence, and also, like, the argument isn't necessarily that we have to stop them in the US, because NSA intelligence can help prevent them elsewhere by notifying other governments. Like, okay. So like the NSA. Okay,
yeah. Do you want a question then?
Can I have a question? Yeah. So on your C2 on human rights, is this just like, I'm just trying to get a, like, this is like what is the direction? Is it like internet freedom causes authoritarianism, which is bad for human rights? Or is that I'm just trying to clarify that. Is that it?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. You're just making sure.
Yeah, for sure. That's pretty much cross.
Yeah.
That was 20 seconds of prep. Order's just going to be down their case, and I'll weigh as I go. Cool. Awesome. Is anyone not ready? Starting their first argument about pandemics, one, the private sector falls. Bill 20 finds the United States public health officials hoping to assess broad compliance with stay-at-home orders and spot dangerous crowding are obtaining personal location data in bulk from loosely regulated online advertisers and have discussed obtaining it from Google. Literally look at your iPhone. The private sector is literally putting in contact tracing the status quo for the next pandemic. We're going to be even more prepared. The private sector is solving. But second is information overload. Tier 15 finds that the NSA has so much data they can never access it or use it in a timely manner, and that means that the NSA's data is actually collapsing in on itself. The implication we're going to make on pandemics is that there's too much data on the millions and millions of citizens in America. There's going to be no way to actually use the data, and we'd argue that other alternate methods are a lot better. But then third, you can delink them, because Rules 20 finds that tech solutions can now fill severe physical gaps, including structural gaps. Migration and local information is not a useful predictor of the spread of disease, and surveillance empirically does not matter. But then fourth, contact tracing does not work. A study from the Medical Express 20 explains that contact tracing is useless unless done in the very early stages of the spread of a virus. However, we would only know to do contact tracing once the pandemic is somewhat known. In fact, Homeland Security 2020 finds that the spread of the coronavirus was too low and covert for government surveillance to even notice it, meaning the government surveillance is ineffective fighting pandemics. But then fifth, pandemics spread exponentially, meaning that if the NSA surveillance misses even a few people in each instance of contact tracing, the virus would still spread significantly. For example, in South Korea, just one person called patient 31 slipped through the crack was the cause of the entire outbreak in the nation. They're going to say that the NSA surveillance is a prerequisite or helps us figure out a way. Their card in this question is absolutely atrocious. It says that we can prevent it with 2 weeks. Doesn't mean one, that doesn't mean you're going to solve it, and two, pushing back the time frame 2 weeks still means it's going to spread exponentially. That's the word we're going to give you an argument. But then do some weighing. Yami 17 finds that since pandemics begin with zoonotic sparks, there is a high level of spark risk, which makes pandemics extremely likely in Central Africa and South and Southeast Asia. Insofar as their only solvency is domestic, we outweigh. A is on scope, because U.S. response to pandemics isn't key. Other countries have followed infrastructure, and our argument about data localization outweighs, because we affect every single country in the world, whereas they only affect the United States, and we actually solve for the countries where the pandemics originate, not just the United States. But then second, we're prerequisite, because our argument prevents epidemics from rising in the first place. They're doing post-pandemic mitigation for 2 weeks, and that's not like a really good argument. But I'm going to cyber. First, to response to the unique public. Year 20 finds that there's been a 350% increase in ransomware attacks against the United States, and the NSA worsens the problem. The NSA routinely weakens company cyber defense so they can exploit weaknesses to increase surveillance power in 2 key ways. A is backdoors, because Cal 14 explains the NSA installs backdoors in American technology products, which they can exploit for surveillance, which can be processed and targeted by terrorists as well. But then second is 0 days, because Cal 14 explains the NSA stockpiles security vulnerabilities about companies. Indeed, SOC 14 finds that rather than informing companies about these vulnerabilities so they can patch them up, the NSA just uses them for continued surveillance. But then third, you can turn it, because Gallagher 14 finds the NSA plans to hack into millions of computers and implant them with malware for mass surveillance under a program called Turbine, which will undermine the security of the internet and make it more vulnerable for attacks by third parties. But then fifth, you can delink it, because Goiten 15 finds that companies currently share all necessary information with one another, and the government has no incentive to give useful information to companies. Therefore, there is no incentive for spying on by the NSA. Literally, the data that the NSA collects and these hacks that are happening are completely independent of one another. But then sixth, you can delink it, because Goldsmith 20 finds the credibility of the information, that credibility that we get from private networks is being used to solely monitor computer threats and not doing bad things. This means it's extremely difficult for the government to establish credibility, and they will hold back unless we start to suffer a catastrophic cyber attack, which means that the cyber attack is going to happen either way. We're just going to do post-cyber attack mitigation, which is not their arguments. On the links proper, group them. First, the NSA surveillance is failing right now due to massive information overload. The cost application, we'd argue that the status quo is failing. We'd argue our impact is prerequisite. On the first impact about electricity grids, one, electricity grids aren't people. You can still do surveillance on them. There's no warrant for that. And second of all, we'd argue that cyber attacks, like, they don't give you any warrant as to why least extinction, no warrant at all. On the third argument, one safeguard, on the second link, on second impact, one safeguard solid, because nothing is better than being protected in nuclear weapons, safe than the weapons themselves, which have multiple layers of safeguards. And second, most of the so-called loose nukes are too old to be used. It's unclear if any weapon would even work after 20 years of corrosion with both the nuclear and non-nuclear materials, the device and radioactive decay of certain isotopes. No implication, no warranting that that's how a cyber attack is a terrorism. And we argue this is actually this bad rhetoric, and that's like this reason, like, for why people have been able to do bad things in the past.
Okay, so the order of my speech is just going to be, I'll start by rebuilding my case and then I'll go into theirs. Okay. Let's start on an argument about pandemics. First off, we'll concede the fact that the private industry is going to solve, but this also means that you can cross-apply it to their second impact on pandemics, because in these other authoritarian nations that they're supposedly impacting to, private corporations still exist, therefore they can solve back with contact tracing. Look to China, look to Taiwan, look to Singapore. All these examples show that contact tracing is effective by private companies. Now let's go into our contention 2. First off, you can group all of their responses, all their responses that say that the NSA is creating vulnerabilities and the NSA is doing bad things, because this is number one, all from 6 years ago, from 2014. But the reason that this is important is because our evidence actually postdates this and says that in 2019 there is a new cyber directorate established, and that is why the NSA has changed their strategy. Men from 2020 actually indicates they're rebuilding trust with the private sector, which is why none of their responses from 2014 actually apply. But thirdly, that's why our evidence from 2020 indicates that currently they actually disclose 90% of the vulnerabilities they find, and the reason this outweighs the arguments is because there's countless other actors that have the ability to hack into these systems, which is why you should not take away the single entity that protects these systems. But fourthly, we would say that the cyber director, which we were talking about before, has actually established connections with the defense industry, so that's why their credibility response doesn't apply either. But then they give you a response about how companies are already sharing data with each other. Number one, we are not talking about data sharing. We are talking about literally tracking the communications and intercepting the malware. This is not responsive to our case. But then they try to say the credibility means that there's not monitoring. Number one, our evidence postdates this and says that there is a new cyber director, so that's why it doesn't apply. On the impact level, we're going for impact about power grids. You can extend the fact that this is, first off, this is analytics. Second off, we would say that it's not stopping surveillance on the power grids. It's stopping the malware comes from communication in between people, which is why when you stop surveillance between people, you stop surveillance on those communications and intercepting malware. Then we impact to extinction because we told you that a power grid shutdown, which they don't contest, would cause 90% of the population to die because they lose utilities and energy that are critical. Let's go into their case. First, on Islamophobia, number one, you can actually turn it because bulk data is actually comparatively better at reducing biases than all other alternatives. Siegel 15 explains that predictive targeting curbs unjust intrusion because it introduces a scientifically based objectivity that can balance against the law enforcement's subjective human biases. The alternative, which is subjective human bias, is comparatively worse. But secondly, you can turn this argument because the U.S. has stopped 50 domestic terror attacks. Sales 14 explains the government collecting bulk data and examining it has identified associates of the terrorists who they may be conspiring. This turns their case because the problematic Islamophobic assumption that American culture has, which is that Muslims do terror attacks, is already embedded into American culture. Bell 20 explains that immediate effect of the attacks was a rise in Islamophobia throughout the U.S. and there was an increase in 481 hate crimes against Muslims. But thirdly, you can turn it because other government agencies continue to exist. Kudani 14 explains that underpinning all the surveillance of Muslim Americans is an assumption that Islamic ideology is linked to terrorism, but the FBI will still have 10,000 intelligence analysts working on counterterrorism and 15,000 paid informants. This is comparatively worse because it actually increases state crackdown and surveillance. Knob 18 explains increasing anonymity may actually foster FBI and police awareness about protest visibility, which is perceived as suspicious. This justifies more harsh policing. But fourthly, you can turn it because it increases private contractors. Shorrock 15 explains that with intelligence and defense budgets cut, thousands of NSA officers will leave the government for positions with defense contractors, and this actually increases civil crackdown because they have access to things like social networking sites. Let's go into their contention 2. First off, the grid attack actually links in because if nations recognize that vulnerabilities exist in their own system once the US has been attacked, this would actually increase crackdowns on censorship so that they can protect their own networks. But second off, we outweigh this argument on clarity because A, their evidence is all from nearly a decade ago. The impact should have already occurred. There's no indication of how much worse this gets. But B, in cross, they can't even name to a single one of these countries. You have no clarity on the political climate of any of these countries. But thirdly, there are countless alternative causes that contribute to crackdown, for example, government power and stability. But on the impact level specifically, their empiric about pandemics is from 2013. The status quo actually proves that authoritarianism is better at handling pandemics. For instance, look to China, who had a better pandemic response than the US. But second off, we would say that democracy actually hurts the environment, which is an alternate reason that giving more power is good. Rhino 707 explains that environmental groups have a hard time getting their foot in the door. When budgets are tight, democracies may actually ignore environmental problems, perceiving economic issues to be more pressing, which are why authoritarian states are more capable at handling it.
So like y'all went for your first link on your first link on grids, right? So like the impact is like you said 90% of the population is gonna die. So like what isn't that, how is that extinction? What?
No. First off, 90% of the population dies, and then because there's the lack of utilities and the lack of other things, like it's like a chronological sequence. So first 90% of the population dies, and then because there's so little utilities and so little professional aspects to treat the other 10%, the other 10% end up dying.
In America?
No, just the entire population. Because America is a significant aspect of the entire world. They're connected and intertwined to a lot of trade. They provide a lot of resources, and also, sorry.
Because we don't give like foreign aid anymore.
No,
like, that's global
not
extinction.
America, no. America, if the entire population of America dies, which is within itself pretty bad, then this causes a lot of trade routes to break down. And America is one of the nation's biggest trade producers. Also, they produce like a large portion of the world's food. So this causes agriculture to break down. This causes utility. This causes trade. All of it to break down. So like even if it doesn't cause like complete extinction, it kills most of the people.
Real quick follow-up.
Okay, sure.
Actually, you know what? Y'all can have a question. I'll ask you later.
Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about this idea of authoritarian nations falling into like crackdown and internet surveillance, right?
Yeah.
So even before Snowden occurred, authoritarian states had internet surveillance. We agree on this, right?
Yes, but the data localization that happened was uniquely after the Snowden revelations. That was the Hill 14 evidence that, first and second one that was like conceded.
Sure. So why is this data localization and Snowden so unique? Like, why are there not alternative considerations to whether authoritarian states could crack down on internet or not?
Sure. So the warrant is the warrant comes from, the Hill again. It says that data localization isn't something that these countries want, but they're being pushed into a corner because the NSA gets information from companies abroad, and that means that they don't trust anyone. They only trust the data internally, which means that they stop spreading data across country borders and they keep it internally and domestic. That's the warrant for data localization.
Sure. But aren't there other reasons like authoritarian states crack down on the internet and stuff?
Not for data localization specifically.
Okay, so like what nations is this happening in?
Southeast Asia, Africa.
Which country in Southeast Asia?
Give me a second to tell you. I'll have to look at my evidence. I can look later, but it's like authoritarian regimes. There's not that many.
So they're already authoritarian.
Can I take a question? Yeah, sure. These authoritarian regimes do data localization, which is bad for pandemics. Let's talk about this grids argument, right? How exactly, just walk me through it, right? Like a cyber attack happened, and then everyone in America died. Oh, sorry. I wasn't planning.
If the judge is all right with it, I can answer the question. Okay.
Sure. Okay. So if American food, if American food exports happen, how does this lead to global extinction? I don't get that one.
Okay, sure. I'll walk you through it. So America produces a large quantity of the world's food, clean water, and a lot of just general utilities for the world, right? If this breaks down, A, this causes a lot of resource conflicts. B, this means that a lot of trade breaks down and states have to basically scramble. And C, there's a new opportunity to create instability between states because everyone's now suspicious of each other because it's basically been seen that an entire population of a country can be wiped out, especially one as powerful as the United States. And then D, sorry, should I finish?
Yeah.
And then the other ways that it leads to extinction is because it offsets the global power balance, which is essentially when one large power decreases, like one aspect of hegemony, it offsets like the multipolar worlds and causes war.
Do you wanna see?
Okay, sorry, I was muted. Order, I'm going to start on our case and then move on to their case. Specifically, I'm going to start on their second contention and then move up to the first contention. So just kind of weird. So bottom up when I get to their case. Awesome. Time will start on my first word. Let's talk about our case. On our first contention, they tell you that the FBI has counter-analysts. What this means is that FBI is still going to do surveillance, which means at the end of the day, we can still stop cyber attacks with the FBI if they tell you themselves it's going to fill in. But even then, let's go into our second contention. They never respond to our second link about credibility. What Kel 14 finds is that right now, the NSA is weakening our international reputation because we're trying to spread free speech movements while still having a bunch of the censorship with the NSA, which is why, all in all, we tell you that specifically when the United States, like if the NSA goes away, we're going to have our increased credibility and increase our international reputation, which means that we're going to be able to increase a lot more. With that in mind, if a free speech links into pandemics, first, the human rights impact goes pretty much conceded. The Fraser 16 evidence tells you that specifically without free speech, you lead to authoritarian governments, which leads to political oppression. All in all, right now, Halvorsen in 2014 finds that 3.797 billion people are controlled by authoritarianism, which is why they're the ones who are actually harmed by these. They're harmed by all these like human rights movements. But even then, the pandemics argument also goes conceded. What we tell you is when you actually increase the amount of freedom of speech, you actually increase the you make it easier for governments to actually track and access this data, which means at the end of the day, we're the ones who can actually solve the pandemics, because in other countries, you can actually tip off, like these governments can tip off when a pandemic spreads or not. They just tell you that authoritarianism causes a better response. We say, sure, even domestically, it would cause a better response, but in the first place, the way that it starts spreading is when it reaches other countries, which is why we tell you that, for example, SARS it could have stopped spreading if the information went out sooner, which is why if you have more internet freedom, you're just going to be able to stop the pandemic even faster. Then they tell you that democracy hurts the environment. They don't implicate it that there's no impact there. Let's go into their case. You can sign your ballot on turns. The Gallagher turn goes conceded. The Gallagher turn specifically tells you that the NSA is planning to implement a program called Turbine, which causes millions of devices to be harmed with malware, and it basically infects them and makes them a lot more vulnerable to cyber attacks. That's really critical, because that means that we're just decreasing cybersecurity in their world, and leading to extinction is a lot more likely. But the second thing they never respond to is the information overload turn. The information overload D-link. What we tell you is that because the NSA currently has way too much information, they can't actually access it and use it effectively in order to stop cyber attacks. This goes completely conceded, which means that they don't actually have any solvency. Finally, on their impact, their warrants are not in case. They read you a bunch of warrants in Crossfire, but they just said, oh, power grid hacks lead to extinction. We can't even respond to it. Remember what Naman tells you, if there's no warrants or no implication, do not let them bring up new warrants or new implication later on. With that in mind, I would say we outweigh on clarity of impact, since our impact is a lot cleaner, but second is outweighs on probability, because their own argument talks, their own evidence says it's a question of if, not when, for pandemics, which means that extinction is inevitable for pandemics, but it's not for cyber attacks, since we don't know what's going to happen. Really quickly, on our first case, they say that the Biddle 20 card kicks us out of our own. Our argument is about private corporations. Like, our argument is just domestically, there's private corporations such as Google, but they're not in other countries, which means that we don't solve internationally.
Anyway. Then it's going to be my case, their case. I'll sign those, it'll be clear. Anyone not ready? The grid Lincoln is 100% conceded in the first summary. What we tell you is if the negative impact happens and the grid goes down, then we'll just increase data localization elsewhere, because other countries will overreact to the vulnerabilities that apparently exist, which means that they will then over localize. It turns it basically just turns the whole app. The Lincoln is conceded, which means you look to our case first. On the C2, start on the C2. Here's the problem with what he extends. He extends the turbine stuff. This is just another backdoors argument. It's just like they insert malware to spy, that creates vulnerabilities. We frontline backdoors like 8 times. First of all, the new directorate, their evidence is from 2014. The new directorate is solving this by increasing data sharing between companies. But second of all, backdoors, we gave you the argument that vulnerabilities always exist. It's just better to have an agency in there to prevent them from causing harm. Vulnerabilities always exist. But then, and then also it's from 2014. We haven't seen a grid attack since then. It makes pretty pretty much no sense. Then they extend the information thing. Here's the problem. First of all, empirically, it's incorrect because we've been able to stop cyber attacks on the grids, which means clearly we're able to sort through this data. Second of all, their evidence is talking about terror, not grid attacks. Those are two different sets of information. But third of all, this evidence is very old. AI since then has been able to solve and better sort through data. At that point, you can extend our argument. What we tell you is that grid attack attempts have been increasing, and if they are successful, it will cause extinction. They're latching onto this thing that we haven't given you a warrant. We gave you the warrant in case 2% of the population feeds the other 98%, and that's all reliant on technology that is due to electricity in the United States. They don't read a card against it. You should obviously prefer the card to their analytic. On the link level, all of it's conceded. What we tell you is that the NSA is able to, with surveillance, detect malware bombs that are placed in these and then disrupt them. And also, second of all, it gives us the intelligence to hack the hackers and take out the source of any hacking in the first place. At that point, the solvency is really, really clear on this argument. On the weighing, once again, we link it to extinction. It outweighs any sort of human rights impact on magnitude. But second of all, on the linkage to their case, once again, the linkage is conceded at the top of their C2. You should obviously negate right here because they conceded a link into their case. On the pandemics, on their C2, a couple of problems here, right? First of all, on the pandemic's impact, they just say that it's about when it spreads to other countries. But if authoritarian countries are better at handling the pandemic impacts, then it won't spread out as easily, which means that still solves their argument. And the fact that they concede the turn that authoritarians are better at handling pandemics, which means that their case, the negative, actually helps pandemics and decrease the extinction. But the second thing is that they say Google doesn't go to other countries. Absolutely untrue. Google is a global corporation. These huge multinational U.S. private corporations are solving as per their own defense on our case, which means that either way the impact is not unique. But they give you some like clarity weighing. Here's the problem: they can't name you a single country. Oh yeah. One more thing: they tell you that the FBI, the FBI intelligence is going to solve that. The FBI, our evidence indicates, only does counterterror, not cyber defense. It doesn't take out our case. They do clarity of impact weighing, but they give you 0 countries where any of this ever happens. It doesn't make a lot of sense. You should vote on the link. Yeah.
You can ask the first question whenever you're good.
I don't really have a question. Do you want
Okay.
I'm down to skip it if you don't have anything, but
I don't really.
We're
you can-
screaming. We're not gonna skip.
Yeah, I'll have a question if that's all right.
yeah, go ahead.
So on your impact of pandemics, can you just like explain as to how like localization solves pandemics? And just re-explain the word.
I'm sorry, what? I think you cut out a little.
Oh, sorry. I meant, can you explain how you solve pandemics on the C2?
Okay. Oh, okay.
Did you hear?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay.
So, second contention, right? So basically what happens, for example, in China, right? I'll just bring up China. Basically what happened was there was a SARS outbreak, right?
Yeah.
And because the information was stuck in China and the data was stuck in China, or like the communications, the government didn't tap other countries or tip off other countries that there was this huge outbreak going on, which is why eventually the response was too slow. And if the SARS outbreak had been like tipped off to other countries earlier, then it would have led to it like decreasing.
Company data localization means that like,
or it's not company data localization, it's just internet freedom in general. So it's like, if you censor the internet, like if you censor the internet, then information can't get out, which leads to impacts. Could I get a question?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go on to your like link about pandemics, or sorry, cyber grids leading to extinction.
Yeah.
So this thing about like,
okay, like I can clear this up really quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
You read an analytical response to a carded argument
I understand
that says we would all starve. Like it's pretty clear. The judge should absolutely be preferring the carded evidence that says that we would all starve as a result of the grid collapse.
Evidence, but you just read it as extinction happens from power.
No, the warrant from case is that 2% of the
is
population feeds 98% of the other.
2%,
aka you go ahead.
Here's the thing, right? So the argument is basically through starvation.
No, I understand the argument. Wait, so the 2% to 98% thing was in case?
Yes, it was. It was in case. Absolutely.
It's possible I missed it. Then you can have a question.
Yeah, it was the Weiss 19 evidence. It was in case. Absolutely.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
You can have a question then. I probably missed it.
Yeah. On pandemics again, I guess. So is like, what is like, how much solvency do you have for? Like, is it like it will just be like if data localization happens, like pandemics just end faster or something like that? Like,
I guess they get detected faster. Yeah, the SARS outbreak wouldn't have happened. So yeah, we'd stop pandemics.
wait, it wouldn't?
I mean, like, it's just like helping stop. It's the same thing with your C1. It's like we help detect it.
But why? Okay, well, why would countries like hide that a pandemic? Like, I'm confused as to like why you need a free internet if the country could just say like pandemic's happening. Like, why do you need a free internet to distribute information about a pandemic?
Or it's just freedom of speech in general, right? And also it's like the government censoring everything. But yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
That's cross.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Cool. The probability weighing Derek does goes cold conceded in summary speech, and that ends the round. We tell you that from their own card that pandemics aren't a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And that is a 100% conceded impact scenario that leads directly into extinction, which means that at the top level, there's going to be an extinction happening in either world. We're doing a risk of solvency and stopping that. I'll get to that later on in their case, but let's go to their case now. They make a couple of new responses in the second summary that's so abuses don't evaluate it, but our argument about information overload is so clean. They say our evidence is old. It's from 4 years ago. The warrant still applies. And then the second thing they say is about terrorism. Their argument is cyber terror. I don't know what else you want me to say. Our argument about information overload is so simple. We tell you that in the status quo, the NSA is collecting so much metadata that it cannot formulate it. It's looking for needles within haystacks on haystacks and haystacks. When an analyst does a QA research into a box, it leads to 40 billion different outcomes, and that means they don't even know what data to look for. Insofar as that should take out their entire cyber argument, because NSA domestic surveillance is doing absolutely nothing to detect for attacks on cyber grids. That's terminal defense on their case, and that ends the round on their case. But then let's go to the impact level. They just said they have cards, sure, but the warrants need to be with the cards in case. The warrant that they gave in case is that 98% of people rely on the 2% for feeding, but that's only a contingent on the United States population. Even if you give them 100% access to impact, it doesn't mean global extinction can happen. It means that the entire population of the United States might die off, and that's 320 million people. That's not even close to extinction level impact, which means that our argument categorically outweighs on scope and strength of link. But then let's go to our case. They say they're linking just a bunch of buzzwords thrown around that doesn't even actually implicate to the argument. Just because there's going to be an overreaction in cyber attacks, they might reform their grids, fine, but that doesn't mean they're going to actually that doesn't mean they're actually going to like solve for their own data localization or like their own credibility. That makes absolutely no sense. No warranting, nothing in second final focus. Our argument is also conceded. We tell you that in status quo, the United States government has zero credibility with other countries. When the NSA stops doing domestic surveillance, it gives them more credibility with other countries, which means the authoritarian regimes are going to stop doing they're going to stop clamping down the data. And insofar as that, they're going to actually start spreading the information for pandemics a lot quicker, which means that you still solve global extinction. The only argument they extend is that authoritarian regimes are better, but they dropped Derek's frontline that says that even authoritarian regimes are better, the pandemic still spreads globally. So even if domestic response is better, it still happens after the pandemic spreads in the first place. That's cold conceded weighing, cold conceded probability weighing, and there's a charm from their case. It's a really clean enough ballot.
Let's just do weighing at the top, and then our case, and then their case. Sorry. Okay. Here's why we win the round on weighing alone. First off, the Lincoln, which was mishandled from rebuttal into summary, is that when the US grid gets shut down, this creates mass paranoia within other governments to protect their own network. So what they do is they enclose domestic internet more and crack down more. This straight turns their link, and it was read from rebuttal into summary. Their oblivious response is just because they didn't respond to it. And this means that the pandemic response would actually be worse after our impact. We are winning their impact. But secondly, we went off of magnitude because lives is always going to outweigh because of irreversibility. There's no implication as to how many people die from human rights crackdown, and also their pandemic's response. We're also delinking them on pandemics. On the other hand, we impact to extinction because what the evidence that we read from case indicates that the U.S. supplies 98% of global food, which is why everyone's going to die if the U.S. population dies as well. But thirdly, we outweigh on probability. They concede our links. So just because their evidence indicates that it's inevitable doesn't mean that we don't win this round on probability alone. On power grid specifically, the only response they extend to you is about information overload, which is extended through Inc. Number one, this was a response made against pandemics and rebuttal, and they made a new cross application in summary. So it's very fair if Josh responds in second summary. But the responses they extended, that Josh extended, was that firstly, their evidence is about physical terrorism, so there's no implication under the cyber realm. But secondly, their evidence is literally from 6 years ago, and it is empirically untrue because this information overload has never actually caused an attack. But thirdly, we're telling you that because their evidence is old, new technological innovations like AI means that we can actually sort that categorical data overload, which means that it's not a problem. That means that we straight win our link that says that the NSA detects malware bombs through surveillance in between citizens, and also because the surveillance is able to take out the hackers and preemptively stop the attacks from happening. Then the impact level goes conceded in terms of carded evidence. We told you that it impacts you. We told you that if they growth shutdowns, that means that food supply decreases, and they read in analytical responses, but you should prefer our cards. Let's go on to their case. On pandemic specifically, number one, we told you that we are outweighing this argument on clarity because they literally can't provide you a single country in which they're stopping this pandemic. But number two, we told you that since they only saw this in 13 countries, they can't actually stop a pandemic from occurring because pandemics can occur in other countries. They're only impacted to 13 specifically. But number three, we told you that the cross-application from rebuttal into summary was that private companies can step in like Google. Google still exists in China and areas where these pandemics starts, and they read themselves that this solves the pandemic, which is 3 pieces of terminal defense on their case.
I'm just gonna go speech by speech, and then go over like what I have left at the end of the round. But both cases were good, so I'm gonna start with the affirmative rebuttal. The affirmative rebuttal. Wait, hold on. Yeah, the affirmative rebuttal. Okay. So I thought it was good. I have a couple of comments. One, I think your rebuttal is a little top heavy. I would have liked to see specific responses to the 3 reasons why Intel is critical to detection, attacking hackers, and deterrence. Just for the rebuttal to be a little bit more line by line. I think that like all the terms you read are great, but like if you're gonna read terms, it's probably kind of silly to like read like just general D-links and general non-uniques. It's probably better to attack the specific warrants, so that way you can still use any given link. I also think if you did respond that way, you could have grouped the last 2 because one of them was hacking the hackers and another one was like deterrence. It's basically the same thing in my eyes unless they give a separate warrant for deterrence. 2, I think the prerequisite laying on the first contention could have been a little bit clearer. I thought it was kind of muddy. I also think the safeguards response at the bottom of nuclear weapons could have been a little bit more fleshed out too. Okay, so for negative rebuttal, good. I have a couple of comments. One, your front lines were a little muddled. Just say they got a new director and are rebuilding relationships now and you post date once. I think you like repeated it a couple times. Like just say it cross applies to these like 4 or 5 like responses and that'll be enough for me. Also then you can just reply to Goldman afterwards after you do that once. Your extension of grids was a little messy too. You don't tell me about the internal link between stopping malware leading to grid, like a power grid getting shut down in rebuttal. Make sure you like extend that. Obviously it's second rebuttal, so you still have time to like extend your narrative and stuff like that. I just would have liked that to be a little bit cleaner in rebuttal. So you went from the link level in subpoint A of their second contention to the impact level of their subpoint B. If you're going to make that big jump, tell me you're like stepping over that link and just going straight into the impact. It's fine if you do that because you're answering the impacts, which is more important than the link in my opinion anyways. But make sure you just signpost that a little bit better if you have a flow judge. Also, you never tell me why authoritarian governments are better for their first impact on the right to expression. Make sure you, wait, hold on. No. You never clearly answer their first impact on the right to extension. That's what that was supposed to say. So I would have liked to see probably just a little bit cleaner response to that. So for affirmative summary, Pro went first, right? I'm like not flipping the sides. Yeah. Okay, cool. So affirmative summary, good. I have a couple of comments. One, the internal link into why you see this decrease of free internet speech is data like localization, right? Not the internal link, the warrant probably is a better word. You should call it that in summary. Otherwise I don't get the whole like link chain. I think overall like the summary just probably kind of muddied up this link chain about if free expression or free speech was the link into stopping pandemics, or if like data localization was the link into both. I think overall the summary kind of framed it in a way that said, like I literally have it written on my flow for pandemics that an increase in free speech makes it easier to track and trace data. That's not the link y'all give in case. The link y'all give in case is data localization. I need that to be a lot clearer because if we have a shifting narrative on links, I don't really know what to like vote on, right? So I think that needed to be a little bit clearer. I also think you needed to frontline at least some of their responses on data localization. The most important in my mind were A, asking for specific countries, just give a specific country, y'all should know specific countries. B, that there are alt causes to crackdowns, like data crackdowns in these countries, so it's non-unique. They didn't extend that one, but I think that non-unique was probably should have been answered. Good job calling them out for not putting these like internal links and warrants about power grids in their case that they talked about in Second Cross. Like she gave like 5 examples of how it links in Second Cross, none of which were the argument that was actually in case, which was the 2% 98% card, which by the way was in case. So yeah, don't miss that. Negative summary, got a couple of comments. One, you jumped up to the FBI front line, which is good that you answered it because you needed to answer it, but you should have just went straight down their case instead of starting at the impact level. I think that muddied it up a little bit. The warrant you give in case says that 2% is feeding 98% is great, but your rebuttal speaker should not have added those like 4 new warrants in Second Cross. I thought that was a little silly when you had the one in case. If you have those 4 warrants, great, put them in case. They just weren't in case on my flow. I also don't get any explanation as to how this 2% being in control does or doesn't matter with power grids shutting down. The other team never really made this point, but like y'all never tell me why like these like power grids shutting down actually has anything to do with like this 2 to 98%. The explanation is that this 2% that does produce food heavily relies on the power grid to produce the food, right? Like that needs to be really clear, and that like warranting was not clear. Like y'all should probably just like have this memorized at this point that like obviously you need energy to make that much food that quickly, and it should have just been explained like way better the entire round. Okay, so affirmative final focus. Got a couple of comments. If y'all are gonna collapse on faster response is better for a pandemics argument, I think the 95 card needs to be in both summary and final focus. The 95% card, it's just a good card. It should be there if y'all are gonna collapse on it. 2, I think you should have probably put some meta weighing as to why I care about your probability weighing over their magnitude weighing. I think that would have been good. And then 3, the warranting of pandemics impact was a moving target this entire round. Like I talked about earlier in summary, I was told that the right to free speech made it easier to track. Then in final focus, I heard this data localization that just needs to be clear. Not super clear, which is your warrant. So y'all need to probably work on like mirroring each other or whatever. Oh, also PS, new responses are allowed in second summary. It's not abusive. Yeah, like back in the day, rebuttals didn't even frontline. So that's a thing. The rules say that you can do it. So that's all I'm going to say about it though. Blake, final focus, gonna have a couple of comments. The 13 countries response and the Google responses are not on my summary flow at all. I don't know if that means that they weren't said or if I just missed them, but I thought those were 2 new in final focus. I also thought that there was a shifting narrative as to what this food production card actually says. You told me that the US provides 95% of all global food in final focus, but in summary is clearly like this 2% leading to 98% card. I think that y'all need to like just like stick with one number, keep it there, tell me that data like production or food production needs energy. Just like it was way more muddy than it needs to be for y'all. Like the warranting is like just pretty intuitive and makes like logical sense. So y'all should just be making logical sense with it. But I felt like y'all were making it way more like complex than it needed to be. So at the end of the round, I have 3 issues left on my ballot. I'm just gonna rip off the Band-Aid. I did vote for con. For pandemics, I don't vote here for a couple of reasons. One, I don't vote here because the link from summary to final focus, like I talked about earlier, is just not clear. 2, I think y'all mishandled the link in until final focus, and at that point, it's just way too late for me to evaluate. I think that the affirmative in some degree is linking in. 3, this one is the like least important one, so I wouldn't worry about it too much, but there is not really any contextualization about what countries are on the brink of localizing their data right now. I think y'all should have like that, like it's a softball, it's like a softball block to your case, right? Like no like examples, just give an example. Like it helps build up your narrative. So it's kind of a softball thing that y'all should be replying to anyways. So power grid. Yeah, the negative continuously frontlines the FBI defense and the overloading defense. At this point, I give them offense into this idea that food production will be shut down. However, I would have really liked to have more clarity on the warranting and the numbering for food production. I also wanted to hear that food production relies on the power grid just like once. It would have been nice to hear it like once. The power grid linked into, I could also vote there because I think the affirmative mishandles it. So yeah, that's how I vote. Are there any questions?
Thank you for judging. Good round, y'all.
Very cool.
Thanks for judging.
Thanks.
Good luck in your future rounds.
You too. Good luck.
Everybody have a great rest of your tournament.